April 1945. The waters around Okinawa were deceptively calm, a blue sheet stretching across the horizon, hiding a storm no radar could soften. On that horizon, American destroyers held their positions like lonely sentinels, scattered miles ahead of the main fleet. Their engines hummed, their radars swept in constant circles, and their crews waited for the attack they all knew was coming. The next wave of kamikazes diving out of a brilliant Pacific sky. They were the picket line, the first to see the enemy, the first to be hit, and often the ones with no chance of escape. For the U.S. Navy, the survival of the entire invasion force depended on these isolated ships, and on the men who stood watch knowing exactly what awaited them. By spring 1945, the United States faced a reality that had shaped every battle of the Pacific. Japan would defend its skies with everything it had left. Okinawa required an early warning shield unlike anything attempted before, a ring of radar-equipped destroyers positioned far ahead of the fleet. From these distant stations, they could detect incoming raids and buy precious time for the carriers and transports behind them. The concept was simple. The execution was brutal. Small American destroyers were placed dozens of miles ahead of the main force, forming a circular perimeter. Their radars reached deep into the sky, often detecting Japanese aircraft before they even crossed the island chain. But the Japanese understood quickly, these American eyes were the key to the entire defensive system. What followed was a level of intensity few naval units had ever experienced. Waves of kamikazes, sometimes in the hundreds, turned toward the picket stations. Thin-hulled destroyers found themselves fighting entire formations alone. U.S. Navy records would later describe radar picket duty as the most dangerous assignment in the Pacific. The shield held only because the men on those ships refused to break. Their sacrifice would define the battle. To understand the sacrifice of the American radar pickets, you have to picture how they worked. Not as scattered ships, but as a single living system stretched across miles of open water. Each destroyer owned an entire sector of sky. Their air search radars, mainly the SK and SP models, scanned far beyond visual range, sometimes picking up aircraft over 100 miles out. From the main fleet, these ships appeared as distant dots on a plotting board. But to the Japanese pilots, they were the first obstacle, and the easiest to overwhelm. A typical radar picket station held one destroyer, sometimes two, supported by smaller converted landing craft nicknamed pallbearers. Their grim name reflected their mission. They were not there to fight, but to rescue survivors when, not if, the destroyer was hit. Life on these ships was a cycle of tension and exhaustion. Rotations were supposed to last 10 days but often stretched indefinitely. Sleep came in fragments. Gunners ate meals beside their weapons because the next alarm could come at any second. Radar operators kept their eyes fixed on glowing screens, looking for blips that might represent dozens of lives at risk. When radar detected incoming contacts, the ship transformed instantly. Gun crews sprinted to stations. Officers calculated intercept vectors. Engines adjusted course to keep guns pointed properly. Overhead, American fighters scrambled from Okinawa or offshore carriers, but the timing was often razor-thin. The Japanese soon adapted. They realized destroying the picket stations opened a direct path to the American transports and carriers. Kamikaze groups began targeting the pickets deliberately, diving through walls of American fire. Some stations became infamous. Picket Station No. 1 was called the Dead Man's Post. At times, more aircraft attacked that single station than the rest of the fleet combined. The destroyers held their ground anyway, because the alternative was disaster for the entire invasion force. The picket line proved its value almost immediately. Radar screens lit with clusters of incoming aircraft, the first waves of Japanese bombers and fighters, many already transitioning into kamikaze units. The destroyers reported the contacts, vectored American fighters, and prayed that the intercept would come in time. Ships like the USS Bush and USS Colhoun fought off their first attackers with skill and discipline. But the Japanese came in waves, often from different directions at once. Every American gun opened fire. Every lookout scanned the sky for a glint of wings. Sailors described the air as alive, filled with smoke, metal, and the rising roar of engines diving toward them. Destroyers were agile but lightly armored. A single hit could cripple them. 2 hits could sink them. And the kamikazes kept coming. As weeks passed, attacks grew more coordinated. Japanese planners sent groups of suicide aircraft supported by decoys to confuse radar operators. Some planes hugged the ocean surface to avoid detection. Others poured out of cloud banks in steep dives. The U.S. Navy realized the picket line was facing not scattered raids, but a deliberate strategy. Japan understood the value of those American destroyers. Every ship destroyed meant a gap in the shield. Gunners grew faster. Radar operators grew sharper. And still, the attacks intensified. By mid-April, the radar picket line faced its first true crucible. Massive Japanese raids converging on individual stations in overwhelming numbers. One of the most famous stands occurred at Picket Station No. 2, where the USS Laffey faced a storm that would become legend. As radar contacts multiplied, Lieutenant Commander Frederick Beckton ordered his crew to full readiness. The first kamikaze missed. The second clipped the deck. The third struck the stern. Then the attacks came from every direction: high, low, port, starboard. Gunners shifted positions so often that their arms went numb. Smoke blanketed the decks. Fires erupted faster than they could be controlled. The Laffey survived 6 kamikaze hits and 4 bombs. Against all expectation, she stayed afloat and kept fighting. Not every ship was as fortunate. The USS Bush was hit repeatedly until fires spread beyond control. The order to abandon ship came while the sky still buzzed with attackers hunting survivors in the water. Despite losses, the radar net never collapsed. Every time a ship went down, another moved forward to replace it. The Americans refused to give up the perimeter, because giving it up meant inviting the destruction of the fleet. Okinawa's geography made everything harder. Winds pushed smoke back across decks. The bright Pacific sun made spotting aircraft a challenge. Clouds created blind spots. Radar bought time, but the environment stole it back. The pickets fought through all of it. The U.S. Navy understood it needed more than courage to survive Okinawa. The solution came through rapid adaptation and engineering improvisation. Support craft with additional anti-aircraft guns were added to vulnerable stations. Amphibious vessels carried extra radar operators. Fighter director teams were stationed aboard destroyers to orchestrate air defense more efficiently. The Japanese countered with decoy aircraft, staggered attack heights, and low-level approaches that hugged the waves. Radar operators found themselves tracking dozens of targets at once, each one potentially deadly. But the Americans improved too. Coordination between picket ships and carriers sharpened. Intercepts by fighter groups grew more effective. Ground-based radar arrays on Okinawa began supporting the sea-based net. Destroyers rotated more smoothly. Ammunition replenishment became more reliable. The shield grew thicker, more flexible, and more refined. The picket line was no longer a gamble. It was a system, and a brutally efficient one. Still, none of this reduced the emotional pressure. Sailors lived with constant tension, sleepless nights, and the knowledge that each day could be their last. Yet they held their positions, because the mission demanded it. In late April and early May, Japan launched the largest Kikusui assaults of the war. Massive coordinated attacks meant to crush the picket line once and for all. The destroyers felt the change before radar confirmed it. The sky had a different weight. Engine noise carried differently across the water. The USS Bori faced one of the fiercest attacks. Radar detected a massive formation. The ship maneuvered hard, guns opening fire in rapid succession. A kamikaze slammed into the port side. Another struck near the bridge. Fires raged. Steering was damaged. Systems failed in sequence. Yet the crew refused to abandon their ship. Even crippled, the Bori fought back, her guns blazing from improvised positions. Sailors stepped through flames to pass ammunition. Radarmen continued to track incoming planes even as smoke filled the CIC. Elsewhere, multiple picket stations were hit simultaneously. Communication lines failed. Decks buckled. Antennas were torn away. Some ships fought while already half flooded. It was the breaking point, the moment Japan threw everything it had left at the Americans. And still, the picket line refused to fall. By mid-May, the momentum began to shift. Japanese aircraft quality declined. Pilots had fewer hours. Fuel shortages crippled operations. Radar screens once filled with blips now showed long moments of quiet. American coordination improved dramatically. Fighter director officers placed CAP fighters in optimal intercept positions. New radar sites on Okinawa expanded coverage. Destroyers rotated more predictably, crews rested, and damaged ships were replaced quickly. The psychological change was unmistakable. Kamikaze strikes continued, each one deadly, but they no longer had the force of earlier waves. Some attackers crashed miles off target. Others broke formation entirely. The shield was holding. The pressure was easing. And for the first time, sailors believed they might survive the battle. By early June, the ability of Japan to launch large-scale air attacks collapsed. Airfields were wrecked. Aircraft scarce. Pilots exhausted. The radar picket line remained on station, scanning the sky with disciplined calm, but the worst had passed. Okinawa was still contested, but the air war had been decided. When the battle for Okinawa came to an end, the cost carried a weight the numbers alone could not express. Dozens of American destroyers had been hit. Many had sunk. Thousands of sailors had been killed or wounded, most of them far from the beaches or headlines that defined the broader campaign. But the destroyers of the radar picket line achieved what no one else could. They absorbed the worst of the kamikaze onslaught. They bought the minutes the fleet needed. They kept the carriers alive, the transport safe, and the invasion on track. Historians call them the Shield of Okinawa, but the men aboard them rarely used heroic language. Most said they were simply doing what their duty required. They endured fire, fear, exhaustion, and isolation to protect the sailors behind them, thousands of Americans who would never know how close they came to disaster. Without the picket line, the kamikazes would have reached the heart of the Navy. Without the picket line, Okinawa might have become a catastrophe. Instead, the shield held, battered, burning, but unbroken. Today, the story of those American destroyers remains one of the most overlooked chapters of the Pacific War. It is a story of vigilance, sacrifice, and resilience, of young men standing alone on a horizon no one else could see, holding a line that had to be held. Their legacy lives not in monuments, but in the calm that followed their storm. A calm they bought with time, steel, and courage.